can say use binocular rivalry, it's a nice tool in which you have the same physical stimulus, blue and red, in the two eyes, but your experience, consciousness, changes over every 2 seconds or so, and it doesn't depend on the stimulus because it's always the same. So we can ask using tricks, which is here frequency tagging. We tag by flickering the stimuli, what changes in the brain when you're seeing one and not the other. And we find that the difference between seeing the red ones and not seeing it, more power throughout many regions of the cortex when you're seeing it, and more coherence between distant regions of the brain. So you find these things, and people have done many experiments that begin to pinpoint areas that are important, areas that are not, so we're learning a lot through that. Here's one of unpublished experiments yet, which I think goes beyond many of the problems that there are with the neural cognitive function. This is a work done with Francesca Ciclari using dreams, indeed. It's what we call a within-state, no-task paradigm. Many studies of consciousness are based on comparing, say, wake with sleep. We did a lot of anesthesia with sleep, and you learn, and with wake, and you learn important things about what makes it possible for consciousness to be there. But there are also confounding factors because lots of things change when you fall asleep, not just consciousness. And vice versa, most of the other kind of studies, like rivalry, have to do with one particular content of consciousness, but the subject is always conscious in the meantime. On top of that, it's typically in the context of a task. You have to report actions, as Joseph said. And that is not necessarily part and parcel of consciousness. So this is an interesting paradigm in which we wake up subject many, many times per night, and we ask them to report about the last thing they experienced where they were still sleeping. And now we compare, this is in non-REM sleep, roughly a third of the awakenings, they tell you that they were having some kind of a dream. They were seeing something or thinking something and so on. And 1/3, nothing. They weren't there, the universe was not there. Okay, so we have a beautiful contrast within the same state. And on top of that, there is no task whatsoever, because when you're dreaming, you're not performing any task, and you're not asked to report when you're dreaming. And it's amazing, using high-density EEG, I won't show you the data, but we can see that the neural correlates of being conscious versus not within a state and with no task involve, in blue, posterior regions, primarily medial, that are actually not surprising in some sense. And then one region which is around the sensory motor cortex, if you wish, up there a little bit more in front of that. This comes out within non-REM sleep, but the same contrast gives the same results in REM sleep, which is a radically different state. Again, using the few instances in which you don't do. So this is a nice way to get over many of the methodological problems there are. It's remarkable. One thing is, it's much less widespread than people thought. When you do task-related things in wake, it's lots of frontal areas. This is much less than that. Interestingly, the blue spot, by the way, it turns out this has to do with perceptual experiences, purely perceptual dreams have to do with that. Area being high frequency and non-low frequency. And vice versa, this red spot in the font is pure thought. If you're having an experience of pure thought, which sometimes happens in sleep, that's what sort of must be in a readiness state. So there are experiments like this that we can do, and they're getting better, and we learn a lot. By the way, you can figure out whether you were dreaming of faces, of places, of movements, and speech, purely with EEG, before you wake this up. You can predict that. So that's quite remarkable. Yet, there are hard questions and hard calls. My favorite one is that one, in there from the first lecture I gave on consciousness, the first thought I gave on consciousness. The cerebral cortex has 16 billion neurons. The cerebellum underneath is a bit smaller, but it has 67 billion neurons. You take out the cerebellum, nothing whatsoever changes in your consciousness. You're the same person. The richness of experience flows just as crowded and as unimpeded as before. You take out the cortex, which is a quarter of the neurons, you don't exist. That's it. Okay? It's a very basic fact, it's been known for quite a while. There are some now beautiful demonstrations that that is the case. And there is no explanation you'll find in the literature. I used to ask luminaries, why is that the cerebellum doesn't do it? And of course, because it's involved in motor control, or answers like that, which is ridiculous because the cerebellum is involved in all kinds of things. It has visual maps, auditory maps, somatosensory maps, vestibular maps, perceptive maps, you name it. It has more neurons, lots of connections, all the genes you want, all the receptors you want, and it is heavily interconnected with the cortex. So what's wrong with the cerebellum? If you can't answer that, you understand nothing about consciousness. All right? Then there is that, which is everybody tells you these days that there is a lot going on in the brain which is unconscious. In fact, there is probably. This is one particular experiment in experienced chess players. They do lots of things unconsciously against naive people who don't. And those are the areas that seem to be very important in doing things unconsciously. Basal ganglia, vagal structure, which are also very complicated, heavily interconnected to cortex, and yet, you know, they don't show up. If you read that sentence, or any other sentence, something in your brain is going to parse that sentence, understand it, find somewhere in memory the answer to that, give it back to you, and produce some kind of nice program that allows you to articulate the answer to that. Most of this happens unconsciously. All you're conscious of is what you see, what you hear in your mind, and then you hear yourself saying the answer. That's it. And the rest is happening unconsciously. What's wrong with the basal ganglia and all those other structures? It gets worse. One of the reasons why I study sleep is because in non-REM sleep, early in the night, for instance, if I wake you up, then it's very likely that you don't report anything. You have absolutely no consciousness whatsoever, as we found out again in that experiment. Yet the firing of the neuron in the cortex is roughly the same as in wake, as you can see there. So it's now the same structure, the same part of the cortex. The neurons are firing just as much, but you're not there. That's another little problem. It's not just the location of the brain. It seems to have something to do with precisely how they are fired. Very mysterious. Lots of people think that, you know, synchronous firing, oscillation, coherence, whatever, that's very important. Take a seizure, generalized seizures, tonic-clonic or absent seizure. What happens in the brain early on in the seizure is neurons fire much more than usual, much more synchronous than usual. What happens to consciousness? It goes away. So now suddenly every simple-minded explanation is activity, synchrony, this and that, can't be. It can be just that, because, for instance, of seizures. These are all factors, very, very basic factors, well known to any neurologist. If you think about that, they do present hard questions and paradoxes. Then there are hard calls. One I like best is if you have a patient like the one to the right, with a brain island, one piece of cortex, say auditory cortex, that's working sort of normally, 40 Hz oscillation, all kind of stuff. Sometimes this patient may pronounce a word, occasionally, have nothing to do with what's out there, but we do. And then you wonder, is anybody home? And if you don't have a theory, just based on the data, what are you going to say? That he is having purely auditory consciousness, maybe purely pain, and not anything else, of course, because the rest of the brain is not working. Or maybe there is no consciousness whatsoever. This is not the kind of question you can answer by doing neurology. Right? You can't, just like that. Sleepwalking is another case. When you sleepwalk, you sort of behave. You can't do super sophisticated things, but pretty good. Some go to the refrigerator, get something to eat, and they are not in touch with you, but they seem to be doing things. It's not clear whether they are conscious or not. And you can look at their brain and see some of it is sort of like wake, some of it is like sleep. What does that mean? Are you there? Are you not there? Babies are a particular problem. When they are born, the only activity they have, somebody did the experiment at birth or near birth, is the amygdala. The amygdala is very active, the rest is not important. The amygdala is perhaps signaling that there is, you know, the angst in being thrown into the world, dash, 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 and Heidegger. So, whatever that means, that's all we have. Does it mean that the baby has enormous fear? Or there's nobody there? I don't know that. No easy answer to answer like that. We already heard about Thomas Nagel. It is indeed a question you can ask for any animal. Octopus is my favorite. You've got 8 brains plus a central brain, sort of the same size. What is it like to be an octopus? It's even worse than what is it like to be a bat. Is it like anything at all? That's the subject to the question that Joseph asked. And what precisely is it like? That's the qualia question. Again, it doesn't, you can study, we finally understand roughly how it works, we're not yet there. But you're not going to get consciously miraculously spring out of that. And I think the biggest challenge, and especially in this audience here, is that bigger than patience. This is Watson, who beat, as you know, the American champions in Jeopardy, answering questions very well, using all kinds of tricks, but he did. Then there is the self-driving car, and then there is Siri, or Samantha, or whatever you want to come up with. Yes, there are issues with deep learning and so on. It's not as simple as it seems, but it's really, finally, for once, going very fast. And we are close to the ability to create genuine artificial intelligence in the sense that there may be machines that can do many of the things we do as well, if not better than we do. It's just a matter of when, I think. And if the Human Brain Project or something like that is successful, this is taken from that work, well, if we simulate in a digital computer, which is considered the working of all the neurons of not only a mouse brain, but eventually a human brain, like my brain, the behavior is going to be identical by definition. And indeed, even the way it's done, you heard about functionalism, okay? So the internal states, so in terms of functional power, causal law within the system, everything is going to be the same to these virtual neurons that are simulated there. So, are these artificial intelligence machines that do it in a different way, but the behavior is the same? Or something like a Human Brain Project creature that behaves like me and sort of works virtually like me. Are they going to be conscious or not? Most functions would say, look, if it does exactly the same thing with the same internal states, it's going to be conscious. I say, and I've tried very briefly to at least hint at that, absolutely not. The integrated information theory says that's not going to be the case. Now, the problem with the hard problem of this project is, in my mind, the way the hard problem is usually presented, which is not because the challenge typically does, and most people do, is you start from matter and you try to go to mind. You presuppose the existence of a physical world which is sort of no, that is made of whatever it's made of. And then we say, how can we get consciousness, experience, subjectivity, quality out of it? And the answer is you can't. You just can't. You can try as much as you wish. You will never do it. This is a reference to Colin McGinn and his notion that you never get the red wine of consciousness, so to speak, from the clear water or the grape, depending on the taste of the grape. You'll never do that. You never need Jesus Christ to do that. Okay? And that's very true. You can't. You can't solve the hard problem that way because it's just the wrong way to deal with it. We all think that way. Believe me, I've been in this business for a while. Everybody goes back to that saying, how could this thing do that? Okay? Take the brain, which we know does it, and somehow squeeze consciousness out of it. You will never squeeze an ounce of consciousness out of the brain. So IIT goes about this in the opposite direction, and it's essential to do so. It starts from experience itself, which is illustrated with the drawing taken from the great physicist Ernst Mach. And you can see there, say how you wake up in the morning, you see yourself in the bed, you have an experience, there are colors and shapes and positions, etc. in it, that's experience. You have it, and it is a particular way. Subjectivity and quality. And then, IIT says, well, given experience, let's try to identify what it is really like, its essential property. Another time that they have been called before Kant transcendental properties, appropriate for every experience. And then ask, assuming there's a physical world, assuming there's a physical world is a practical assumption, how can that possibly account? How can physical world explain, support consciousness? So IIT starts then from experience itself. It's key. It identifies its essential property. They are 5. They're called axioms. Indeed, they are organized axiomatically. They're supposed to be immediately evident. They are supposed to be consistent. They're supposed to be independent. They're supposed to be essential. And then it translates these axioms into postulates about how the physical world has to, in order to account for these properties that we know are true, because it's our own experience. And finally, as I briefly showed you, has predictive, explanatory, and inferential power. Now, these are the few slides, the one that come now, that spend an hour and a half only scratching the surface. So bear with me, it's not obviously possible to get this across. I try to give the overall notion. So we start from inside our own experience, phenomenology, identifies properties, and then we assume that there is a world out there, specifically a world of mechanisms like neurons or logic gates, in states like firing or not, on or off, which is a very plausible assumption about what's out there. Okay, we don't need to go down to the level of atoms for this. I think this is good enough. The world, physical world, in the end must have some kind of mechanisms that are some kind of state. But that's a postulate. Consciousness is immediately given. The rest is all conjecture. Very good one, but it's a conjecture. Here are the 5 axioms. Intrinsic existence, composition, information, integration, and exclusion. And the idea is that there are no others. These are the fundamental ones. Intrinsic existence, I would think, more or less, is what Joseph was alluding to with subjectivity. It is the fact that my experience exists. I wake up in the morning, I have an experience. Even of darkness and silence, it is an experience. There is no denying that. That, of course, is a fundamental intuition that underlies Descartes' philosophy, etc. No, he was talking about thought. It exists, or it exists. And that fact is undeniable, it's the only thing that is undeniable. But there are a few other axioms, not just that it exists, this problem. Composition, that means that every experience comes structured with various phenomenological distinctions, typically many, but it doesn't really matter. There, for instance, I wake up, I see the left side, the right side, I see an object, a book, a bookcase, a bed, a body, whatever, and then you have the colors like blue, and then I see binding of these things like a blue book, and so on and so forth. Every experience is structured. That's a fundamental property of every experience. Then there is the third property, that's information. And that, more or less, is what Joseph said when he talked about quality or quality. So this is now the fundamental property that every experience is what it is. That particular experience that it is. It doesn't just exist in general, that's the first axiom. It exists as that particular one. If I wake up, I have that experience and not another one. And there is something that must make that experience what it is and different from trillions of others. And that you can have trillions of experience. We all know. Just watch movies, one after the other, or go through life. It's just one damn experience after the other. Okay? And nobody has ever exhausted the number of possible experiences. But by the same token, this means that the experience I'm having now is what it is, by virtue of its very particular characteristics. Okay? That is a fundamental axiom, which typically goes unnoticed. But it's so basic that we don't pay attention to. Then there is integration, that was definitely pointed out by Kant, the fact that every experience comes as a whole. Yes, you can distinguish various things with it, that's composition, but the experience is always one. You're having one, you cannot experience the left side independent of the right side of the visual field. You cannot experience the color independent of the shape, obviously. It's integrated, okay? It's unified, you can't divide it up. And finally, also, never emphasized, exclusion, which is every experience is not only what it is, but it is what it is, not less and not more. And it flows at a particular speed, 100 milliseconds we think, not faster and not slower. So here this is illustrated by saying the experience I have when I wake up, if my brain is normal, has color in it, for instance. It is not also, or maybe instead, an experience like that one minus the color. That would be the case if I had a brain lesion in V8 that makes me a profound achromatopsic, an anosognostic achromatopsic, of which there are very few. Then I would not see color. I wouldn't even know there is a problem with that. It doesn't exist. Here, of course, we see it in black and white because we have color. You can't just not experience color. By the way, you can't stop understanding English now. Okay? There's no way. It's what it is, not less. It's also not more. For instance, there are neurons responding to blood pressure in our brain that do their job very well, actually, and they are connected to everything else. Yes, everything in the brain. And yet, we have no idea what that is like. that is out. Like color is in, blood pressure is out, and so are probably many other things. Okay? These are fundamental properties of every experience, and I just add briefly, maybe we come up in the discussion. These are fundamental in the fundamental sense that Joseph was talking about. These are fundamental properties of reality. In fact, for all we know, these are the only ones that are truly fundamental. Now, the trick then is to try to take this and translate them into the language of mathematics, so that we can actually ask, as I say, assuming the physical world is made, roughly speaking, of mechanisms of state, like neurons or gates, what does it have to be like to account for those properties that are undoubtedly real? For existence, intrinsic existence, composition, information, integration, exclusion. So now let me say, I can't explain this, really, but let me say something which is crucial because of what Joseph said. So it's called intrinsic existence. That translates precisely what he was saying. I think it must be existence for. Okay? So the idea here is that my experience, this is the axiom, not only exists, that's a fact, but exists independent of any external observer. I usually say, nobody can come and tell me you're not experiencing anything, you're just a machine. Because that's just not true. I have it. So it's intrinsic without the need for an external observer. And here, this is translated, sorry. Okay. Why it goes by itself? Machines have a will of their own sometimes. And the point here is, if I could go into this, existence is translated into cause-effect power. Going back to something which most people have forgotten about, it's called, or has been called, the Eleatic principle, based on sophists in Plato's dialogues, where an old stranger, possibly Parmenides, comes in and sort of makes a statement about what being existing means. Well, essentially it means that you can be affected and you can have effect, like difference but make a difference. That's a very good definition of existing, because if something cannot be affected and cannot affect anything else, we might as well throw it out of the catalog of things that exist. Okay? Now, consciousness exists, and exists intrinsically. That translates directly, into, well, if there is a world out there of mechanism in a state, these must have possible causes, things that affect them, and possible effects. You need both, by the way. Otherwise, it don't exist. And it has to be intrinsic existence. You must be affected and have effects on yourself, independent of an external observer. So you've got to have a mechanism in a state that has potential causes and potential effects, and these are upon yourself, not on something else. This is the key thing, and this can be given a precise mathematical formulation. Composition, the fact that experience is factor, says, okay, this mechanism in a state that exists, because they have, let's call it cause-effect power, to be defined in a moment. It exists, but it can also have structure, meaning, for instance, if we take those three elements, which are like neurons, one on, two off, we sickle them out in blue, they exist because they have some cause-effect power upon themselves, intrinsically, but we can also look at what is the cause-effect power of A only, B only, C only. We have to perturb them, ask, can the system make a difference to them? Can they make a difference to the system? If they do, they exist within the system. Otherwise, they don't. And so we can do this for the entire, it's called power set, A, B, C, A, B, A, C, C, A, B, C. That's the composition. And these are first order, second order, third order, and so on and so forth. There's plenty of combinatorial space for that. Finally, information. An experience is the particular way it is what it is. This is translated now into literally working out, making explicit, unfolding the cause-effect power. This is never done. It has to be done. And the way we do this, which is combinatorially very, very intensive, even very simple system, is we take every subset of the system, so A, B, C, A, B, A, C, C, in that state, within that system. We perturb the system in all possible ways, past states, and see which are compatible with that element being on now, which it is. And then we write down what is called a cause repertoire, the probability of past system states, of which three elements binary there are 8, that could have led to the current state of element A within that system. That's the cause repertoire. 2 states couldn't do it, the other 6 could, we don't know which one, the system doesn't know from inside. Effect repertoire is, I keep A on, it's that particular mechanism within the system, I see what difference it makes in the future state of the system. That cause effect repertoire for element A tells you the entire cause effect power, the way of existing. If cause effect power is a requirement for existence of that element within that system. That's the cause effect power of A. You can do the same for B, which is different. C, AB, AC, BC, ABC. And what you get is called a cause effect structure, which, as I said, is the full description of the entire cause effect power of a mechanism in a state, including the composition. Now there is another requirement for existence. Remember, phenomenological axiom says experience is one, that's integration. It cannot be subdivided into independent components. This translates directly into, we cannot cut our system without loss. In other words, if you can cut it and nothing is lost of its cause effect power, then it wasn't one system. It could be divided into pieces. That MIP stands for the minimum information partition, which is the kindest cut of all, the one that makes the least difference. And we can literally measure how much of a difference it makes when you cut the system along that minimum information partition. If it makes no difference, the system is not integrated. In fact, it does not exist, meaning the whole does not do anything. There's no cause effect power above and beyond the parts. So it doesn't exist. Throw it out. But if there is a difference, if cutting it gets rid of some cause effect power, then that's the measure to which the system potentially can exist. So we measure that is called phi, and it's a measure of integrated information. To what extent the system cannot be reduced in its existence, the particular way in which it exists. And finally, exclusion, I'll be done with this heavy part, says, well, remember, experience is what it is, not less, not more. So now, in principle, you could say, well, ABC is the system we consider that it has that particular cause-effect structure, but why not AB, or BC, or AC, or 4 elements, or 5, or the entire universe, whatever, okay? Let's do that, and we do that. Here you see, in cyan, the cause-effect structure specified by BC. It's small. It has only 2 cause-effect repertoire, and is not very irreducible. Phi is 1. Then you can see a bigger system, including T, that also generates a cause-effect structure. It's big, but phi is 0.44. And now the 3 that we were considering at first is also big, and phi is 1.92. And if you do it for all possible subsets, you will find that those 3 are the set of elements that specify the cause-effect structure, which is maximally irreducible. Phi, the measure of irreducibility of integration, is maximum. And you know, over the same set of elements, only one cause-effect structure can exist, otherwise you would have superposition of causes. And that's all done. So let's put it briefly, after I give you a hint of this, in terms of the axiom saying that consciousness exists, that it is structured, that it is the particular way it is at the experience, that it is one integrated, and it is only one, that it is not less, not more. Those are the axioms. The postulates express all of this in terms of cause-effect power, and they say that if there is a world made of mechanism in the state, which is very plausible, to support consciousness, those mechanisms must be arranged in such a way that A, they exist intrinsically, meaning they have cause-effect power upon themselves, in a structured manner, meaning that a subset within can also have cause-effect power and therefore exist. They exist in a particular way, that is, the cause-effect power must be specified precisely, it's that particular, it's a cause-effect structure. It must be integrated, meaning that cause-effect structure cannot be subdivided without loss. And there is only one, meaning it is only the one that exists the most that exists, all the other ones are excluded, otherwise there is causal superposition. So all the fundamental properties of consciousness, phenomenological properties, are now translated into mathematical postulates that can be applied to anything made of mechanisms in the state. And this leads us to the central identity of IAT that says an experience, the one we're having when you wake up, say, is identical to a conceptual structure. That is the conceptual structure specified by the little system of 3 in the state on, off, off. the conceptual structure is the overall set of cause effect repertoires. Each of these is called a concept. It's a particular cause effect repertoire, okay? Maximally reducible, can't get into detail there. And you can plot that in a space which is called cause effect space, in which all the possible states in the past and in the future are accessed, projected now on the plane. Each concept, each cause effect repertoire is a particular position, and the size of the star is how much that concept or phenomenological distinction exists. So the point here now is that an experience is a conceptual structure, it's an identity relationship. A conceptual structure is a form, literally a form, it's a good analogy, or shape, a constellation of concepts in cause effect space. And that's all there is. That is what experience is. And it's a fundamental aspect of reality, the one we're sure about. And this is the claim. Now, is this claim, which you can find a bit more precise, in fact, a lot more precisely, it takes forever to read the paper, but you'll see the examples and so on and so forth there. This is work done by Mazaruni, Larissa Montakis, and it was recently published, a very good version of this. You'll find it there, but can this lead to intriguing corollaries, predictions, explanations, and inferences? And I'll go through this very quickly. One corollary is that you can take any system, do this analysis, and it condense down in complexes, they're called, that generate these conceptual structures. For instance, that ABC that does do so, it exists, quantity of consciousness, to the tune of 1.92. You can measure how much consciousness there is, how much it exists, and it gives rise to a constellation, shape like that, which is the quality of consciousness. What kind of consciousness? So subjectivity and quality. There may be other objects, they may even interact, but nevertheless, it always condenses down to these individual entities that exist in their own and can talk to each other, but they are independent entities at the ontological level. In fact, you can look at how structure affects this. You can have a system like the one A, you study it, and you find out that the whole system does not exist intrinsically. It exists explicitly, you can show it does, but intrinsically it doesn't exist because it's not a maximum. Each of the individual little modules A, B, B, C does, this is A, B, has only two concepts, it's a very meager constellation, it's a trivially small shape, it's not zero, but it's almost nothing to be that thing. And it's definitely nothing to be the entire. Now you have another system there, 5 elements, all connected to all, they fire if they get more than 3 inputs, and they all go on, for instance. You can analyze this. This is one entity. It has only 5 concepts. They are first-order concepts, the ones specified by individual elements. There are no higher-order concepts, like A, B, A, C. There's nothing like that. Its form, its quality in cause effect space, you can't even see. It's a very little dot that minimally exists, overlapping 5 times. There's basically nothing it's like to be that. But if you take away 2 connections per element, so in a way you simplify it, so that every element is connected to only 3 and different 3, now suddenly that more specialized system gives rise to a very nice constellation with 30 different stars or concepts, and it exists to the tune of 10.25. So it's not at all trivial to map neurons and states onto this. The identity is not between an experience and a neural state, or not even a neural state and the connections. It is this thing, which is a fundamental property of nature, which is a conceptual structure, which requires it to be possible to have physical mechanism as well. But it is what it is, and it doesn't map in any direct way at all. This shows that consciousness can be graded. When you fall asleep, you think neuromodulators are weakening connections, and you are one entity with 10, 5. We then are one entity with less 5 graded, you exist a bit less, and then there's a point in which you just cease existing, and you fragment into little things. That's a direct prediction of IIT. Another strange prediction is that you can have a brain, for instance, where no neuron is firing. The brainstem we better have than firing, otherwise we die. But in the cortex, no neuron is firing, everything is functional, no spikes are going around, no message is being broadcasted, nobody is listening to anything. Yet, that thing would give rise to an experience. I suspect that's what happens in some meditation states like pure awareness, which are very difficult to achieve, but in some conditions you can do that. It's a mechanism in a state that will generate a ton of stars, a ton of concepts, negative concept, not this, not that, not that, not this and that, and so on and so forth. But it's a huge constellation. Okay, so it's a very counterintuitive prediction. People think you have to have some information processing, not to mention some representation. None of them are. Okay? It's a state of being, not a representing processing. Another consequence that's often made fun of is that you can have something as simple as that photodiode, which is minimally conscious, a photodiode with some feedback loop there. That actually has a known zero value of phi. But again, the constellation is trivially low. And importantly, it actually feels like something supposed to be that photodiode tensor theory, but so little that it doesn't matter in the least. But by the way, it has almost no quality because a photodiode that's on, a photodiode that's off, a photodiode that's blue sensitive as opposed to light sensitive, or a thermistor that's sensitive to temperature, they all would have the same minimal experience. So it's nothing, it's not nothing, but it's avoidable, it's nothing to do with what it says about itself. That's another interesting thing. Another one is, purely for forward network, as complicated as you wish, they have zero conscience. That's easy, you don't need to calculate that. That's because you can cut them and they don't do anything to themselves. They can be used, but they don't exist intrinsically for themselves. Easy calculation. It leads to a rather important consequence in this text, I think, in general. These are two systems. This system, if you analyze it, is forming a conceptual structure with a phi value of 0.79 and 17 concepts. One of those conceptual structures I showed you. That system is the feed-forward analog unit. It's much bigger, more neurons, more connection, that's what you need, and it does exactly the same thing. So if you take input here and measure outputs and treat it as a black box, these two systems are absolutely equivalent in function. So much for functions. Okay? So they do exactly the same thing. Respond to questions with exactly the same answers. So make it bigger, make it like Siri, make it like Samantha and her. You get exactly the same answers. Yet, according to IIT, there is something it is like to be this guy, and there is nothing it is like to be that. You would be completely unconscious. And that is rather important when you think about what you can do with computers. We'll get back to this in a moment when we are at the end. I just want to show you some predictions. These were predictions that we started testing with Marcello Massimini and others to really try to do something you can measure phi for anything realistically. But you can come up with some proxies, some very rough approximation. And we use here transcranial magnetic stimulation, CMS, and high density G in subjects who are awake or in deep sleep when they are unconscious. And so if you stimulate the brain and look at the currents that you evoke in the brain with the TMS pulse when you're conscious, you see there's activation where you stimulate, then it jumps around in a very complicated pattern for roughly a third of a second. It's very quick, but that's basically what you get. It tells you sort of that it is one system with a large number of possible states, and what you need in order to have high information integration. Roughly speaking, get very qualitative. Roughly a third of a second. Now you do the same thing, same person, same intensity, same place, same everything. When he is in a state of early non-REM sleep, when you wake him up, he is not there, he is not conscious. What you get then is strong activation there. The brain, remember, is active in sleep. It's also reactive, it responds to the stimulation, but the response stays there, only there, it doesn't go anywhere, and it fades away after 150 milliseconds or so, 120. So it looks like the integration is lost. And that's roughly what you see. We see it systematically in every subject. And the depiction is you have high information integration in wake, low in non-REM sleep, and then we tested it in REM sleep when you dream all the time, almost all the time, and we